All right, I think I'm going to get rolling here. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today. My name is Ann Cadwell, and I'm the Retail Sector Specialist for the Canadian Nursery Landscape Association. Just some quick housekeeping items. All microphones are muted and cameras are off. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat section down at the very bottom of your screen. Here we go. Thank you for taking the time to attend our Garden Centre Canada webinar with Dr. Amy Bowen. Garden Centres Canada is a commodity group under the Canadian Nursery Landscape Association. We specifically focus on retail garden centers, interests, education, networking, training, and marketing. We connect everybody from coast to coast with the intent that shared collaboration brings success for everybody. Robin Godfrey is here today. He is our Garden Centre Canada Chair, and he is now going to introduce Dr. Bowen.
Hello, everybody. I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Amy Bowen, is the Director of the Consumer Insights at the Vineland Research and Innovation Center. With 12 years of experience in research and innovation, she leads a team of researchers to understand the drivers that impact preference and choice to create value-added products for the horticultural sector. Amy has a BSc honors from the University of Guelph in molecular biology and genetics and a PhD in biology sciences from Brock University. So, do you want me to do the intro of the project intro, Anne, or do you want Dr. Bowen to do it?
I think Amy's probably fine doing that, Amy?
Yeah, I can take that.
Our alumni from Brock, fellow Brockers. Okay, I'll let you take it there, Amy.
Okay, wonderful. So first I'll just bring my screen up and then get started. So just give me a moment while I get that all organized. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see that then on the full screen mode, and I'll just move the icons around and we should be all good to go. So thank you for the introduction. I'm happy to be here today. Some of you may have heard sort of part of what we did within this study in some earlier presentations in the fall, but we've now sort of wrapped up all the studies. So I wanted to sort of share some kind of further insights and information that came out of it. So the project was all about trying to understand, what is it that consumers are looking for and what is it they value when they go out and purchase plants. So first of all, this wouldn't have been possible without a lot of different sponsors. So I'll just kind of, first and foremost, like to sort of put those up as everybody that helped out in conducting this research with us. And so our collaborators at University of Guelph, who I'll mention more in a minute, Garden Centres Canada, Landscape Ontario, and Canadian Nursery Landscape Association. And then as well as the American Flower Endowment and the Floral Marketing Fund, all provided sort of funding and support to make this research possible. And then I also, before I get kind of into the details of the study, want to put the research team sort of top and center, because there was a lot of people that sort of brought this work together. So I'm here sort of speaking about it today, but it was definitely a team effort and a group effort to get it to this point. So from Vineland, Alexander Grigorchuk, who sort of really spearheaded and got this sort of up off the ground, as well as Mithun and Sasha Miller for sort of help with sort of the data collection and sort of data analysis of this project. And then, as I said, this was in collaboration with the University of Guelph and the Department of Marketing and Consumer Studies. And so working with Joanne Wang, who is an assistant professor there, as well as a master's student, Nicole Wang, who actually just defended her thesis successfully on some of this work. And then Tawheed, that helped with some of the experimental design for our online survey. And then also this really wouldn't have been possible without the industry guidance. And so I've got to put a big thank you out to everybody on CNLA and Landscape Ontario that provided your input and feedback and responded to all of Anne's requests and emails, and Anne's sort of help and support in getting this project and sort of keeping it sort of on track and moving it forward. So what was the project all about? As I said, it was about sort of understanding, what are the decision making when consumers go into garden centers to purchase plants. So sort of that connecting the dots for effective decision making. And so we wanted to determine, what are the factors that are important, what are the features, and how we can use that to sort of improve the customer experience. So, a big piece of this is the path to purchase. So sort of, I'll put this sort of upfront of kind of what we found, and then kind of give you sort of some of the more details around, sort of what all this means going forward. So really, when we think about like, what are the decision-making processes that somebody goes through when sort of going to decide what plant they want to make, there's sort of several different steps that sort of come into play. And so what we've sort of found is that this sort of summarizes it in sort of these sort of four major kind of buckets. So the first thing is they decide, I need a new plant, or I have a spot in my garden or in my house that needs something. And so they ID the spot and, what that spot, may require for sort of a plant to be successful. So they consider the dimensions, they consider the look they want. So maybe the color, the size, the shape, and they might do some sort of preliminary, sort of searching. They might do some preliminary trips to the garden centers or sort of retail locations, sort of see what the options are before, making that decision of what plant they're going to decide to purchase. Then they go to the retail location. So generally, they're choosing to either go into the garden center, or, with COVID, there's sort of more sort of online and web-based options. So that can be an option as well. But they're basically, deciding on what they're looking for that spot, and they're picking the location based on sort of what their needs are. So, garden centers are sort of their top choice of where they want to be going when they're looking for, sort of high quality products, and when they're looking for sort of bigger purchase items. Reasons cited are sort of largest selection, and also the biggest one is, the experience they have, with the stores, and getting sort of staff advice and feedback. So that's sort of key. So then, they're at the garden centers, they've made their choice of where they want to go, and they're going to browse around, they're going to look around, kind of see their options, they're going to talk to the staff, they're going to, sort of base it very much on kind of that sensory experience of what they're, sort of seeing, and how the plants are looking, all of those, to sort of choose what their plant is that they're most interested in. And what we found here that was interesting is that price tends to be a bit of an afterthought. And so then they make their decision to purchase. So even though they're browsing around the store, they're looking around, they really sort of have made their decision of what they want, they grab it, and then, and then they leave. So kind of a little bit more detail about sort of how they make some of this. And as I said, some of these slides you may have seen before, but I always think it's important to kind of give the context and the background before we get into sort of how we sort of looked at specific features. So what we wanted to understand is why people go into garden centers. Why are they choosing to shop at garden centers versus sort of, other locations, and who are those consumers? And so what we found is that when you compare garden center shoppers to sort of the average Canadian plant purchaser, they are different. So the people that are coming to the garden centers are coming for a specific reason. And we found that 64% of them are shopping exclusively at garden centers. And that we found that of these shoppers that come to garden centers, about half of them are purchasing 10 plus plants per season, versus if you look at sort of the average Canadian, that only about 35% are doing that. So these are sort of your customer base, the people that you're sort of really looking for, the ones that are coming into those garden centers. So if we look a little bit more closely into why are these consumers coming into garden centers, we asked them, through those questions. And so what we found is, the biggest reason was the large plant selection, that they know there's going to be a lot of selection there. They can come in, they can look around, they can kind of see what their options are. And then that sort of leads into the sort of number two reason is the knowledgeable staff. So you've got this large selection of plants, lots of choices out there, and then you can talk to the staff to help you narrow down the choice that's going to best fit that spot that you've ID'd in the garden. That's kind of that key piece to that path to purchase. Other big things are the quality that were cited. In terms of being able to see what the plant looks like and making an assessment for themselves that it has that sort of the look, the vitality, that they think it's going to sort of do well sort of in their location. Another thing that sort of came up is when they choose garden centers, it's when it's sort of those bigger commitment plants. So about 11%, sort of stated this as something. So, they might go to sort of, grocery store or a bulk, big box store, something like that, if they're looking for annuals. But when they're looking for perennials or trees or shrubs, they tend to go to the garden centers to make those sort of what they see as sort of a bigger commitment, sort of long-term purchase decisions. So then the other thing is, do they know what they want when they come into the store? So they're coming for a very specific purpose. Or do they just have sort of some idea that they want to fill the spot and that the garden center is going to give them the inspiration? And so that's really what we found in terms of seeing that about 60% only had kind of a general idea in mind of what it was that they were looking for in terms of, the plant that they wanted. And when we asked them, what helped them make that decision, so that they went from sort of that general target to the actual plant that they wanted to look at, we found that the dimension. So again, it's that where they want to sort of see it, in their location is that sort of that key thing. So 34%, and then 32% thinking about the aesthetics. So is it the right color? Is it the right shape? Does it have kind of the leaf architecture, the foliage habit, those types of characteristics we're looking for. And then again, here, this is where the store staff is so key. With 41% of the, of the shoppers that we, interviewed, saying that they consulted with store staff before making that purchase. So they might be, making some assessments on their own, but they want that confidence from, the employees at the garden center for making that specific purchase. And the other big criteria of that final purchase decision was the vitality, which is really around sort of the health or the quality, appearance of that plant. So that sort of visual inspection of the plant is sort of very key in terms of their decision making. So then we thought, well, we thought, price is going to be important to this all as well, right? Because price is usually important to everything. And so we asked them, did you notice the price before making your decision? And if so, did you make any type of comparison? And what we found actually really surprised us. And I know I'd mentioned this in the fall, as well, but we found that about 68% of consumers didn't really pay attention to the price. They kind of made an assessment that, if the plant had what they were looking for, they were sort of happy to purchase it based on the price that were there. We did see that sort of 30% did make some type of assessment on the price. And so we sort of followed up with those consumers to figure out if they are paying attention to price, what are the factors that are important to them to make those assessments. And so what we found here was that, when they were making these comparisons, it was sort of a quality versus a price judgment. So they were just sort of making an assessment in their head of based on what that plant looks like. Does that price seem fair? Does that seem right based on this quality of the plant? And, if so, then sort of move forward. And so then another weren't even sort of making, even going that far, but it was just sort of, they looked at it, they liked it. Yep, that seems right. It was kind of that gut feeling that they were willing to pay that amount for the plant. A lesser percentage, we're looking at about 14% the price of the same plant at other stores. So only about 14% of the consumers were actually doing sort of price comparisons where they were sort of seeing, if they could find that sort of same plant somewhere else at a similar price. And then only less than 10% were looking at things such as, if there was a warranty or if there was, other features that were going to be important, especially for sort of larger purchases, like if they were going to get it delivered or have someone plant it or any of those types of things. And then what's sort of interesting here is that 41% of them didn't have anything kind of specific in mind. So, in terms of how they judge price, the majority of them didn't have kind of one specific sort of way in which they were doing it. So then we also looked at the shopping experience. And so knowing that shopping experiences have changed a lot over the past couple of years, we wanted to sort of see what are the major things, that people are using in terms of, making their decisions, of shopping at garden centers. So we looked at it both in terms of, in-store and online. And I should also mention that sort of the full results of the studies with, a lot more sort of detailed information will be available on the website, and Anne can follow up in terms of telling you where to find that information. But there's a lot more detail that can go in there. I'm just sort of giving a sort of a higher level sort of key summary findings of that today. But one of the things that, so we did want to understand was, why do people shop in-store and online, and what are the things that they care about most, in those different settings? And so we found that in-store, as we sort of had mentioned sort of previously, the biggest things that came up is that, almost all of the consumers citing that they can assess the plant quality in store, which is something they can't do otherwise, and that the customer service experience is sort of a key reason of why they shop in store. So, sort of the two of those together is sort of that sort of double factor of why they go to a specific garden center and sort of shop there, is because they can get the quality of the plants that they're looking for, and they can get that customer experience that they're looking for. About 77% cited the shopping process. And so things like, being able to browse around the store, being able to look at the diversity, look at the, sort of the different sort of options that are there, being able to kind of sort of see, excuse me, pardon me, sort of see what they were buying, interact with, store staff, and have that whole experience. And then about 65% stated that the variety is sort of a key thing of why they like that in-store shopping experience. So they don't find that there's a variety if they're shopping through other formats. When we ask consumers about the online shopping experience, what they liked about the online was that there was a lot of descriptions about the plants and about the care instructions. And so maybe more than what they would find in sort of an in-store setting, because you can put more information, sort of when you're doing sort of that sort of online sort of at-home shopping. 60% said the convenience of it, that they could shop, anytime they wanted. They could get things delivered, they could do curbside pickup, all of those types of things. And so that convenience was something that was very important to them. The biggest things that came up continually, which was a bit of a negative, which is the flip side of what everybody loves about the in-store experience, was how to make a quality assessment. So 71% said that they found that difficult when doing online shopping. And the number one reason for that when digging into it was because they found that you couldn't see real plant images. So the images that were on the store's website were often sort of stock photos of what the plant could look like versus like truly what the inventory in that store was. And so that was sort of something they found as sort of the biggest struggle of doing the online shopping. And then another aspect that they cared about was the website, so that it was, easy. That's about 50% of consumers, that it was easy to navigate, that they could find what they were looking for, that things were sort of, in stock, and they could, get all the information they needed to make their informed purchase for the plant, and also related to sort of warranties, returns, guarantees, any of those types of things. And another other thing that sort of came up in terms of the shopping experience overall, and so going into sort of what are the features that sort of matter most to consumers, is we found that impulse purchasing was quite low. And so only about 16 of shoppers made an impulse purchase. And when we compare this to sort of impulse purchasing when you go into a grocery store, the numbers are around sort of 80%. So there's a big difference there. And so, kind of the two things that came to mind from sort of our perspective of looking at this study is that, shoppers are unlikely to buy a plant if they don't have a spot for it. And so even though they're coming into the store, they're browsing around, they're really just sort of buying sort of what it is that they sort of came in for. And they're not really thinking to sort of look for other things that might help that plant be successful, such as, care, care and maintenance items that sort of could go along with it. So we sort of took all this information to sort of move into a larger study to be able to understand what are the, the features that consumers value most with plants. And I just noticed there's a couple things in the chat. So oh, okay, no key questions. So that's good. I will just keep going. So that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to identify, the features that consumers value most. So from doing these sort of garden center sort of intercepts where we went into garden centers and talked to consumers, we found some really good information, but we want to do a much larger study to really understand and wanted to see if there's differences between Canadian and US consumers in terms of what these features are that are important to them. And so in terms of doing this is where we got some great consultation, from the industry of what categories to focus on and what plants to focus on. So we focused in on a perennial plant, and we chose the daylily, an annual plant, and we chose geranium, and a shrub and tree, and we chose hydrangea. And then for each of these different plants, we broke them down. Oh, now that I went into the chat, there we go. We broke them down into these different sort of plant features that we could be looking at. So we looked at both, hedonic features, so things like the flower size, the foliage shape, the number of buds, the blossom for daylily, and utilitarian features, which are really more related to sort of the growth and maintenance of the plant. So things like when it blooms, how hardy it is, maintenance or care, and the pot size, and then associated with the pot size was sort of different pricing. So for each of the different pots, each of the different plants, we had 3 different pot sizes, and then for each of the different pot sizes, we had 3 different price points that we looked at. And so the price points were based on what sort of an average price is for that pot size and that plant type, and then doing a markup and a markdown to understand sort of price sensitivity sort of around plants for those consumers. And so for each of the daylily geranium hydrangea, we looked at both these, appearance of the plant features, as well as these maintenance and growth features. So what I'll do now is I'll sort of go into sort of what the results were of those and where there's sort of similarities and differences between Canadian and US consumers. So we looked sort of overall at all the consumers and looked at what are the attributes that they would put most important in terms of a ranking. We saw that for daylily, maintenance was number one, followed by the hardiness, by the number of blossoms, and then by the bloom time. For geranium, we saw that pot size was the top attribute. So whether it came in sort of a small, medium, or sort of large pot, whether it attracted pollinators such as butterflies and hummingbirds, its light requirement, so if it's sun or shade, its growth rate, and then its display method. So whether you're buying it sort of in a pot or in a basket or, for sort of in-ground planting. In terms of hydrangea, the top features were bloom period. So if it bloomed in the spring, summer, or fall, the flower color, the plant size, and then pruning requirements. So if it required, minimal or a lot of pruning. And then if you're looking at these slides or sort of looking at them later, there's like letters and brackets. And so that's just indicating whether it was a hedonic or an appearance of the plant feature versus a growth and maintenance, just from sort of the classification of how we looked at the two of them. So then getting, into sort of what we all care about is what do consumers prefer and what are they willing to pay for sort of these different features. So what I've done is I've broken this out for each of the different plants, and then I've broken it out by Canadian and US consumers. So you can see then for daylily that, both Canadian and US consumers prefer large flower sizes and when they're displayed as buds and blooms. However, in the US, they also like when they're displayed in full blooms. So it sort of shows that they're looking, they want to see the flower, they want to see it sort of, kind of ready to go and kind of have immediate color for when they're sort of looking to get it planted. In terms of care, Canadian consumers are looking for winter hardy plants that are low maintenance, whereas US consumers are looking for low to medium maintenance plants, but didn't have any indication of preference or willingness to pay for hardiness. Canadian consumers are looking for daylilies that are going to bloom in the spring and summer, where there's no preference for bloom time for US consumers. Canadian consumers are also interested or prefer and are willing to pay more when it has evergreen foliage, and they're more price sensitive to the 1 and 2 gallon pot sizes, meaning at the smaller pot sizes, they're not paying as much attention to the price. Whereas US consumers are price sensitive to just the 1 gallon pot size. So if it's in a smaller pot or it's in a bigger pot, they're not paying as much attention to prices as they are in sort of that 1 gallon pot size. So when we look at these consumers, what we did as well is we then segmented these consumers for both Canada and the US. And so each country, we segmented into sort of 3 groups of consumers. And then for each of those groups, we looked at their feature ranks, and then we looked at their demographic profile to see, how we could use this information to, inform next steps and what consumers were interested in and in terms of kind of marketing. And so what we saw in terms of in Canada, we saw that the biggest segment of consumers, about 46%, they cared about the care or the maintenance. So being sort of low maintenance, the number of blooms and when it bloomed as sort of the key features to it. And this segment was mostly females, 30 to 59, married with college or university income or college university education and income about 100 to 200,000 in that range. The next segment was about 32%, and they cared most about bloom time, foliage habit, followed by the number of blooms. So number of blooms being important and bloom time to both these groups. This group had slightly more males, 30 to 44 years old, married, had a graduate education and income between 50 and 100,000. The segment 3 was the smallest segment at 21%. So their number 1 criteria was hardiness and maintenance, followed by the number of buds. This group was mostly female. They were younger, tended to be younger, 18 to 44, married with college or university education and income around 50 to 100,000. So when we look at the US consumers for daylily, we saw three segments of consumers, segment 1 and 2, about the same size with 39 and 38% respectively. And both of them look at bloom number as their number one criteria. And bloom time is their number 3 criteria. So it's just sort of what's in the middle that sort of separates out these two groups. So segment 1, it's about flower size, and in segment 2, it's about hardiness. So segment 1, that likes the bloom number, flower size, and bloom time, are mostly female, over 45 years old, married, high school, and income under basically up to 100,000. So that segment 2 with the 38% of consumers, they're slightly more females. They kind of segment the age groups being 18 to 29 and 45 to 59. Married with high school, university education, and income, but a much larger range between sort of 50 and 200,000. And then the third segment of consumers, about 23%. So they care about bud number, the maintenance of it, and hardiness. And they're mostly female, over 45, married with a high school or some college education, and income between 25 and 100,000. So then if we look at geranium and we look at their preference and willingness to pay, so we did see for both Canadian and US consumers that the display format mattered. So they pay more for an in-pot display versus sort of in-ground displays. Messaging around attracting butterflies and hummingbirds increased their preference and willingness to pay for both groups of consumers. But US consumers were also interested in just attracting butterflies. In terms of sort of light requirements, full sun was preferred over full shade for Canadian consumers, and full sun or full sun to part shade were preferred over full shade for US consumers. Canadian consumers are looking for a moderate growth rate, whereas the US consumers were looking for a fast to moderate growth rate in terms of, I guess, how much flower coverage and color they want to be getting into their gardens or containers. Canadian consumers were more, and actually then both of them, both Canadian and US consumers were more price sensitive to pot sizes bigger than 4 inches. So in the smaller pot sizes, they weren't really paying attention to the price. So we look at our segments for geranium. We've got 3 segments, again, for both Canada and the US. In Canada, we see the largest segment is segment 1 at 62%. And they rank pollinator attractions, light requirement, and display format as their key criteria. Those consumers tend to be 30 to 59 years old, married, and with an income between 50 and 200,000. Segment 2 and 3 are both around 20% or 19%. Segment 2 is looking for pollinator attractions as well, followed by flower shape and display format, whereas segment 3 is looking at display format, light requirements, and pollinator attraction. And just in the sake of time, I'm not going to go through all the demographic profiles, but you can look at those in sort of the full slides and know that the information is all there. So for the US consumers, we've got about 51%, which is our largest segment. They're looking at display format. So whether you're doing sort of like a in-ground versus container or pot display, growth rate and light requirement as their sort of key features that are important to them. And then followed by segment 2, which is about 30%, 32% at growth rate, light requirements, and display format. And segment 3, the pollinators are sort of their key attracting feature, followed by growth rate. And I apologize, but I somehow deleted number 3. So we'll have to fill that in, and you'll have to sort of look that up later because I don't have that right in front of me. My apologies. For hydrangea, preference and willingness to pay, we found that for both Canadian and US consumers that they prefer the shrub style hydrangeas over the trees, and that they like messaging around bloom color changes due to pH and season. Both groups like low to medium pruning requirements and medium to long blooming seasons. And Canadian consumers are price sensitive to the smaller pot format. So if it's a bigger pot, they don't seem to pay attention to the price as much. Whereas US consumers are price sensitive to that sort of the larger, or the 5-gallon pot size. With hydrangea, we've got our groups of consumers as well. And so we've got segment 1, which was the biggest group of consumers. They're most interested in the differences in flower color, bloom period, and plant size, versus segment 2, which is looking at bloom period, plant size, and pruning requirement. And segment 3 in Canadian consumers is interested in the plant size, the flower color, followed by pruning requirement. So really it's the lack of pruning requirement that really separates out segment 1 from those other 2 segments. And then in terms of US consumers, we've got segment 1, which again is looking at flower color, bloom period, and variety. Segment 2, which is looking at plant size, bloom period, and pruning requirement, and segment 3, which is looking at the bloom period, flower color, and pruning requirement. And again, we've got the demographic profiles, of those different consumer groups that you can sort of see in the slides and, in the full report if you want to go through and see that sort of full breakdown. So when we looked at overall in terms of the preference for plant features, we did see that there were quite similar in terms of the sort of overall features between Canada and US consumers. So we noticed that they prefer purchasing plants for what we'd say like immediate decoration because the number of buds, the bloom period, the number of being displayed in buds and flowers were all important things to both consumer groups. They generally like larger plant sizes, moderate growth rates, and longer bloom periods. Prefer low to medium maintenance plants overall, and key features that sort of would differentiate it, such as attracting pollinators, is important to both of those groups. Generally looking for full sunlight requirements was a feature that they were increased sort of preference, and colorful varieties. We did notice, though, that Canadian consumers in particular were placed more importance on hardiness tolerance, bloom time, and foliage habit. So, that may be something to do with climatic conditions or sort of where they were located, and, just in harder to grow areas, being able to get their plants, especially their perennials, through season to season. So that could be an area to sort of look at more in more detail moving forward. So if we look at the role of price and we sort of look at Canadian versus US consumers, we see that in terms of willingness to pay, it's generally higher for more growth and maintenance features, plant features. So, especially within the perennial plants, which makes sense, they're putting value on, sort of that long-term investment into the plant for their landscape. And as I mentioned, as Canadian consumers are willing to pay more for higher hardiness tolerance and specific bloom times. And so again, probably has to do with, sort of the climatic conditions, where they're growing those plants. And so I think that could be, a key area to sort of look at moving forward in terms of sort of defining plant features that are valued based on, the climate where you're trying to grow those plants. But otherwise, Canadian and US consumers had very similar preferences. So we did find, in terms of price sensitivity around kind of pricing and pot sizes, is that for geranium and daylily, they were not sensitive to the price of smaller pots. And with hydrangea, Canadian consumers were price sensitive to the small pot sizes, but not the larger ones. And US consumers were sensitive to the 5-gallon pot size. And so where this is important is in thinking of sort of strategies of how you want to sort of price your plants, and maybe not thinking of kind of a linear pricing model, but pricing, based on size or inventory management, of thinking, where can I get the most value? What are consumers sort of paying attention to, and making some choices there. So again, an area that we could look into further. So we did look at the role of knowledge and involvement, for all of the, for these, or I guess throughout this study. So we thought, if people have more expertise or more knowledge, do they act differently? Do they behave differently? Can that be something that sort of segments out the consumers versus people that have very little knowledge, but, are interested in gardening or just getting into gardening? And the same thing as well as their role of involvement. So how much time you spend, gardening and picking out your plants and spending time looking up your plants versus those that are, just looking for sort of beautiful appeal in their gardens and sort of quick coverage. And what we found overall in this study, there was no significant role of consumer knowledge or product involvement. We did see some trends, such as that consumers with greater knowledge tended to prefer higher maintenance daylilies. So that makes sense. If you know what you're doing, you want more of the challenge. And so you're willing to take on a plant that has, higher maintenance requirements. found that consumers with greater involvement are equally likely to prefer geraniums that attract butterflies and also attract butterflies and hummingbirds. And so, they just want to sort of see sort of life and things sort of happening in their gardens, versus, sort of just trying to sort of bring in sort of one piece of it. And we found Canadian consumers with greater knowledge and involvement prefer hydrangea with higher pruning requirements and shorter bloom periods. So again, this might have to be again with sort of the challenge or, kind of how they sort of see everything kind of fitting into their landscape. In this study, the role of knowledge and involvement were sort of self-assessed by the consumers within the study. We didn't try to sort of screen or pre-recruit for that. And so we may see differences if we were to sort of try to look at two groups of consumers, that one that we classified as more knowledgeable or higher involvement, the results may be different. So again, that could be an area that we look at further on to gain sort of more insights, about consumers and sort of the features that they value when purchasing plants. So then I'll sort of there's sort of lots of takeaways that you can take from this. There's lots of different kind of messages, ways that you sort of can dissect it. But what I thought I would do is I would just give you kind of the three kind of key sort of takeaways as sort of, kind of saw it sort of from the study, and knowing that there's sort of lots more sort of information that we can kind of dig down into and sort of pull out. But these are kind of the three big pieces that I think sort of came out as the key takeaways from it. So one was around price, right? So this whole project was right, how do consumers value price and put value on it? And we found that when you're a garden center shopper, so this may not be true if you're shopping, at big box stores or grocery chains or those types of things, but when you're coming into the garden center, price is not the number one criteria. So they're generally, not price sensitive and are willing to pay for features they value. So this is important to remember. It's not about kind of, we can't just then like hike up the prices, everything by 50% and think consumers won't notice. That's not what we mean by that they're not price sensitive. It's just that they're willing to pay for features that are important to them. And so they make that assessment, as I talked about in the beginning, from a quality, of saying, yes, I'm willing to pay this price for this plant because I think it's worth it for the purpose that I want and for thinking of it, especially in terms of a long-term investment. And so why this is important is how you can use this is in lots of different ways, right? And thinking about how you want consumers to engage with your products, and so that they see the quality and they see sort of the different sort of aspects that are there. So we know that price is going to depend on the different features. So you could try to think of organizing your store based on sort of different features that might be important to consumers. So, an idea is if you're in a colder climate, you could, look at thinking of hardiness levels. And having plants that are more sort of winter hardy, and talking about it maybe not in the plant hardiness zones, which aren't as consumer friendly and consumer recognized, but just talking about sort of temperature maximums or minimums that they can survive to, so that consumers can sort of see those types of informations. Understanding the impact of plot size, sort of even for inventory management, or even for how you organize your store. So maybe it's not by variety, but by sort of different sort of sizing. So if consumers are looking for specific kind of plant sizes, or willing to pay specific prices to be able to set things up so that you don't have to kind of think of that linear pricing model. Care and maintenance were huge drivers that would increase consumers' willingness to pay for features. So based on sort of what your location is, what the plant type is setting up sort of signage, setting up sort of information to give them that knowledge that they're looking for, so that they're finding those features that they want, and they're grabbing those plants and paying for them. And then that way, not having to sort of think of the price as much. So, we can, since they're not doing that price comparison, you can be putting plants at sort of different values in sort of different areas, and people can kind of be grabbing them as they need them. And then focusing on unique features, whatever those might be. In this study, we just looked at attracting butterflies and hummingbirds. I know there's tons of other things that we could be looking at. And so these are some of the things that you could be even like looking at and testing in your stores of what creates value, for your consumers, because then that are places that you can, create better price points and create value-based pricing, for your products. The shopping experience. So this came up throughout, sort of every part of the study, is that garden center consumers are going to the garden center because it's an inviting culture. they want to go in and they want to walk around, they want to see all the beauty of the plants, they want to interact with the store staff, they want to see what's going on. So it doesn't matter whether it was in store, online, curbside, any of those things. It's that shopping experience and creating that place that these consumers want to go, because they're choosing to come to garden centers over any other location. That is sort of so key to all of this. So invest in that experience. And then increase your impulse purchases. So we found that, consumers are going in, buying what they want, leaving, but maybe we can convince them, because they, based on sort of features that are important to them, to pick up other types of things, to create plant care kits, to, I think of the ready-made meals and how to sort of transfer that in, to organize your store so that if they need specific things to do care and maintenance and pruning, they're right there with those specific plants. And so it's just kind of like a one-stop shopping, and they're not kind of thinking of it later. And so you might not be able to increase their impulse purchasing of the plants themselves, but you probably can for other products that are in the store that are going to help them be successful with their plants. So in the efforts of time and everything, I'm going to end it there. But one thing, I'm happy to take any questions. And then the other thing that I would be very interested in hearing is what parts of this research are most valuable, most interesting to you. If there was, if we were to continue, what types of questions or what types of areas would be, valuable to sort of continue sort of moving this forward. I have lots of ideas. I kind of peppered some of them in the talk. I've got some, listed out, but, your feedback's always more valuable, because that's what we are doing this for, is to sort of help you create a better garden center experience.
Wow, that's great, Amy. That is a lot of great information there, especially during these last 2 years with COVID and how it's affected independent garden centers. And it kind of goes in stride with other things that we've heard, that really the two biggest growth areas in our green industry were basically garden centers and growers, because people were looking for the product. Do you think that the trend to not worry about price was generated from the COVID and the lack of supply? People were just buying everything during the last 2 years. I don't care really what it looks like. It was kind of, especially in the first year. Do you think that kind of influenced your research?
Well, it may have, that's sort of something to, to be thinking of. I think a key thing here is we focused on garden centers. So our original hope had been to also, look at sort of same types of things of consumers that are shopping at, say, big box stores, or, at the grocery store, or those types of places. But because of, restrictions and everything going on, that was harder to do. So we sort of just focused on the garden center. So we do know that these garden center shoppers are looking for that experience. And so generally when people are looking for experience, and you can translate this to food, to wine, to, sports, anything that's sort of a, kind of a collector thing, they're going to pay for the value that they see. And so whatever that sort of inherent is. And there's also lots of, data from consumers across all sorts of different sectors, that especially if you look at younger consumers and new consumers to the category, which are the younger consumers, they're not as price sensitive as maybe the baby boomers, or the Gen X or those types may have been, because again, they're putting value on, the experience, the quality, sort of all of that. So there's a lot of factors at play. I think, the price thing, when you think of COVID, yes, it may have to do with things, but at the same time, at the beginning, there was a lot of uncertainty around consumer shopping habits and about, employment, jobs, all of these types of things. And buying plants for a lot of people is considered a novelty and not a necessity. And so the fact that people were still going in, still buying the plants, still not paying attention to price, I think there's a real nugget in there that's really important, that I don't think necessarily, transfers across all consumers buying plants everywhere, but it's really important for the garden centers, that garden retail.
Wow, a lot of great information to digest there. Is there any other questions from anybody in the gallery?
We did just see something in the chat there, which might be a suggestion for next research, is with regards to native plants, and finding people are much more interested in native plants and would be interested in information on how much general people know about that topic. And that seems to be a really big thing now. Like I am finding, even our own area in Squamish, people want to start planting more native as opposed to other things. So that's definitely something.
Yeah, I think that would be really, really interesting. As you said, we just, there were so many plants out there, and anybody that was involved in the consultation knows how hard it was to get it down to those 3 plant categories. So that's definitely an area, is expanding it or looking at more kind of, niche markets, or looking at new opportunities such as native, plants to sort of bring in there. So yeah, I think that's great ideas. In terms of the next question I see in there, I didn't get into sort of the methods. They're sort of all in the presentation. I talked more about that in the fall. But in terms of how many people were interviewed, in terms of intercepting consumers at garden centers, there was about, I guess, 60 in total that we looked at. And it was mostly in Southern Ontario because that's where we could get to. But we did have some information from BC and Saskatchewan as well. In terms of the online survey, then that was across Canada. So that's where I say, I think there is something in there to do with sort of hardiness, and depending on where you live, the importance of hardiness and maintenance is probably going to be valued differently in different parts of Canada and the US.
And how many people did you have in the States when you were doing the?
And so for the online survey, we had, I think it was like 675 consumers, and it was almost equally split between Canada and the US. We had slightly more in the US.
Wow, that's great. Anybody else have any questions out there?
I'll just put my next, if I can here. I'll just put my next, I'm happy to take more questions, but I just thought I'd put this up here just in terms of food for thought of some of the next steps that sort of have come to mind sort of out of this. I think native plants is a great one to sort of add in here. But I think, one thing is, is to test out some of these sort of concepts. So we did all of this based on asking people questions, but I think it would be, sort of fabulous to take sort of some of this and create sort of virtual shopping centers. So, and sort of see how, if consumers sort of come in and sort of make some of these choices and sort of see how they actually interact with the products. Related to pricing, pot size, features. So, we could create something, on campus at Vineland, or we could create something in somebody's garden center where we sort of create scenarios, or we could do it online where it's all through sort of like an online shopping experience to test out the influence of features and pricing and on willingness to purchase, essentially. As well as the role of experience. I think there's sort of more in there than we sort of looked at this time. I'm just seeing.
Oh, I will say though, in regards to native, I invested heavily in native, quite heavily. There was a high demand for it. And the problem I ran into with native is everybody wants native until they see it, when they see it at the garden center. Native plants do not do as well as other plants when you containerize, or they don't look as impressionable as they do in nature. So you have to really educate the consumer on that plant and what it will look like eventually. But that, when we talk about earlier on in your study there on how people, how the plant looks and the aesthetics of it, it's hard to get that full mature native plant in a pot that they see out in nature. So, it was a little bit of a selling feature, training for staff to push that element. They all want it until they see it. And it's not always the prettiest thing.
Yeah, I think native plants, a big piece of it is it's not going to be all consumers. It's going to be a segment of consumers. So how big is that segment, and where are they going to be sort of located, and what is it that they're looking for? I think, being in Southern Ontario, I think about it, you go for a walk of the woods in the springs, right? And you see trilliums everywhere and you think, oh, wow, those are gorgeous. I want trilliums in my garden. So you go buy some at a native plant store. So I did this at my last house. And just as we moved, after being there for 10 years, we were finally getting a patch of trilliums, right? So it's that establishment. So I think that goes to that piece. But for some consumers, that is valuable. That is what they, that is what they really want. And I think it's, it's looking at, there are other attributes that they look at in terms of food, you know, buy local, you know, all of those types of things that sort of will tie into this. So I think there's a segment there that's very keen and very interested, but I think there is, it's never going to be for everybody because some people want the big, beautiful, showy as quickly as possible, right? That's one of the things that they're looking for in terms of filling a spot.
I think Elaine Hickey had a question. I'm just gonna allow her to talk here. Here you go, Elaine. Did you have a question? Oh. Oh, it's not working. So you just have to type that out.
Hello.
Oh, there we go. Go ahead and
Okay.
ask the question.
Yeah, I agree with what Robin is saying there about the native plants. That's definitely a fact. They don't look as good, but there are a few people really interested. I was wondering if my first thought was, can we get a copy of your PowerPoint, Amy? It's fantastic. And I'd love to have it to show to my manager, to Len when he's here, and our son who is interested in this sort of thing, right? So just wondering if you'd mind sharing your PowerPoint with us.
No, not at all. Yeah, I'll share this with Anne and she can get it out to anybody that's interested. And then as well as I said, this is just like a snapshot of the fuller report, which has a lot more sort of detail and information in it, but this is kind of a nice summarized version of it. So yes, for sure I can share that. And I think that, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Amy, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You can finish.
The fuller report, which I think is almost 100 pages, is actually available in our membership portal on the CNLA website under Garden Center Resources. So you can see it's a big report.
I won't be
that
reading that.
That has all the details about, you know, the sample size, how we collected all the information. So it's good to look through in sort of more detail for it. I think I was just going to address about educating the consumers. And I think that is, you know, garden centers have the opportunity because people that are coming into garden centers are coming in to have the experience to interact with the staff to sort of build it all. But it's going to be like anything, is consumers are only going to be educated if they want to be. You know, it's no different than sort of any other aspect in life. So it's about providing them the information and making it easy for them to make, you know, informed decisions that are going to be beneficial for them as well as for, you know, the community that they're growing plants in.
That's great.
And oh, sorry.
Oh, hi, Elaine.
Hi, Anne. Remember, this is a little off topic here now. Remember last day when we were talking about Year of the Garden, and I told you I had a great quote. Well, I found it, and for Year of the Garden, and it's by someone named Howard Zinn, and it goes like this. And it's the first thing I thought of when the topic of Year of the Garden came up. And he says, small X, when multiplied by millions of people, can transform the world. I thought it was perfect for the Year of the Garden. If everybody did a little bit, spent a little bit of money, or the majority of people, man, we could have one absolutely beautiful Canada, beautiful provinces right across the country. And the thing is, we have to pull them in as many people as we can to get them involved in this. All our towns, our mayors, our councillors, you know, get them involved and then get them to involve the towns. And I think we could make this a really big thing.
And you have to shop it all.
Elaine, that actually exists already. It's called Green Cities Foundation. Christine Levette's on the call right now. That's already been started by CNLA. It's a wonderful association. And if you want more information, we can hook you up with that, because that's exactly what we're doing at Green Cities Foundation.
Sounds fantastic. I'd love to. I'm really excited about this.
I'll send you all that information.
Good, good. I have 2 locations. I got one of our mayors absolutely on side, and the other one I'm waiting on a call back. So I'm just waiting on them.
Elaine, we need you to advocate with Peggy, our Communities in Bloom, which is an extension of our Green Cities, as a conduit between the Green Cities Foundation and the municipalities and the public. So it's something that's a great thing. We'd love to have you on our team on that. That's great.
Yeah, love to be.
Exactly what we're doing.
Good stuff.
Thank you.
Excellent. You're very welcome. Bye-bye. And I've
Oops,
You muted yourself, Elaine.
what happened there?
Yeah, I did something. Yeah, a lot of this I knew, but I learned stuff too. Like you assume that people, no, I don't, but I've heard other people say, my husband being one of them, well, you know, about pricing. Well, they're out, you know, comparing prices all over the place. And I thought, no, if I saw something that I liked and it was the quality I wanted and what I wanted, I don't give a damn what it costs. If it's reasonable, I'll pay it. And I think a lot of people feel that way. Yes, there are a small percentage, I think you said 13% or something, who do that. But I think the majority of people, if they like what they see and it's well taken care of, it looks beautiful, and it's going to look beautiful in their garden, they'll buy it. That's just my thought.
And that's what the data set shows. That's what the data shows.
That's what the data shows. It certainly does.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and I will say that all the consumers that we sort of intercepted at garden centers were people that were making a purchase. So if they were just in there looking around, we were actually talking to people that had already made a purchase so that we could understand what thought process they had used to make those decisions. So these were, you know, your plant purchasers that we were interviewing.
Well, that's even better. Exactly. That's not just random. That's someone who's bought plants and here's why I bought it. Yeah, I agree. Perfect.
And
Christine, I noticed you're putting, oh, you're not, she's muted herself, didn't she?
Oh,
Christine, if you look at the chat, Christine, she's very involved with Green Cities Foundation and the 2 Billion Tree Project. If you look at her ideas there on how you can, you know, use the local resources like landscape designers and architects in your area to help educate your staff and or your customers, you know, it's a great opportunity there. And if she wasn't on mute, I'd tell her to say something. Oh, you should take your mute off, Christine.
I asked her to unmute. Hopefully we won't take too much more time here.
Oh, sorry, we're running out of time. Christine, you have something to say before we mute you again?
She just said she's got no audio or video. She can type.
Okay, no problem. Okay, Ann, moving on. Was another question you wanted me to, someone asked another question there about native or?
No, I think that's good. Oh, with regards to education, you know, that's maybe something Garden Centers Canada can help out with, some verbiage or some slideshows that each garden center can input into their training possibly. Plus there's also our manual that does integrate some information about native plants. So just
the manual is actually very good. If you would like to download it, it's a great resource for especially new staff coming into your business, and it's like it lays a nice base. So if you have a lot of, you know, high school or university students for the first time coming into your company, our training manual is actually a very, very nice place to start.
All right, and I'll let you just wrap up about the summit. Amy, thank you very much. It's always awesome.
Okay,
Amy,
wonderful. Thanks for having me.
That was great, Amy. It was phenomenal, and we'll make sure that we get that out to our membership.
Yeah,
a lot of great information there. Yeah. So before I go on, I'd like to, you know, tell everybody about. Don't forget about the summit coming up this July. It's in Edmonton. It'll be the first one since it'll be the first one since our first one, and 2 years later, and our first one was very successful. So I really hope that everybody take a look at it. If you have any questions, ask Ann, and please consider going to it. It's a wealth of information. It's a great time. It's not too long. It's not too short. It's a day of traveling on looking at wonderful garden centers in our own country. There's some really good ones in Edmonton. So yeah, I really encourage you to take part in it. And plus there'll be some education on it. Corey Burdine's coming in. His family has a wonderful garden center in Detroit. I think there's like 3, 4, maybe even 5 of them. Very, very successful in not so much the most economically successful city in the last 10 years, Detroit, but he has flourished there, his family business, and it's been around for a long time. Plus some great other speakers we're going to bring. So I really, really hope that some of you sign up or take a look at it. It's going to be a great event.
Yeah, and it's not it's also about, really networking. Like we're actually together. We're going to be having lunch under glass at the new Enjoy Center. We're going to have dinner at Greenland's Nursery all together. So it really is about collaboration, sharing ideas, getting revitalized after these last 2 years, a time to kind of share our trials and tribulations and our excitement for the years to come. So we're really excited about this summit.
Perfect. Any other questions before we sign off here? Anybody? Anybody? No? Amy, thank you again. That was wonderful. Gonna have to go back through it all again. It's some great information, and it's so relevant to where we are in independent garden centers. I mean, independent garden centers are relevant again in so many ways, and it's really quite impressive. The chains are set in their little square box. They're not going to do any more thing out beyond that. And really, independent garden centers really took advantage of what happened in the last 2 years, and it was great. Some places the chains got a little more reactive, but not so much. I feel like I said before, in the last meeting we had, I told Anne, I think all I've done for the last 2 years is look and buy product. Look for product all over North America, trying to source it because everybody wanted something. It's been amazing. So yeah, independent garden centers are doing well, and there's a reason. And Amy really kind of showed the reasons why independent garden centers have done well during this tough time. Anything else before we go?
I think that's it. That's great.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Really appreciate it.
Everybody,
thanks again, Amy.
Great.
Thanks for having me. Have a wonderful day.
Same to you all. Take care.
Bye.